I'm Savannah Caldwell, 31, and I never thought I'd be sitting in a sterile law office watching my sister Morgan receive a $10 million inheritance while I got nothing but cruel words. "Go earn your own fortune," my father's voice echoed from beyond the grave. The shock paralyzed me as I realized 15 years of sacrifice for my family meant absolutely nothing. What I discovered next about my parents' empire would shake our family to its core and unleash a storm of revelations that no one saw coming. Before I continue this shocking family betrayal story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoy real-life family drama with unexpected twists. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for the justice that's about to be served. Growing up in the affluent neighborhood of Westchester County, New York, I had always been the responsible one in the Caldwell family. Our sprawling colonial home with its manicured lawns and private tennis court was the envy of many, but inside those walls the dynamics were far more complicated than our neighbors could ever imagine. My parents, Richard and Eleanor Caldwell, had built their fortune in commercial real estate development. Their company, Caldwell Properties, transformed neglected urban areas into thriving business districts across the Northeast. From an early age, I was fascinated by their work. While my younger sister Morgan spent her weekends at parties and shopping sprees, I shadowed my father at construction sites and attended business meetings whenever he would allow it. "Savannah has the mind for business," my father would proudly tell his associates, his hand resting on my shoulder. "She's got the Caldwell instinct." Those words meant everything to me. I studied business economics at Wharton, graduating with honors, turning down job offers from prestigious firms to join Caldwell Properties. My parents had always emphasized family legacy, and I believed with every fiber of my being that one day I would help lead the company they had built from nothing. Morgan, 3 years, my junior, took a different path. She dropped out of 3 different colleges, each more expensive than the last. She traveled through Europe for 2 years on our parents' dime, posting glamorous photos on Instagram while I worked 70-hour weeks at the office. When she finally returned, she launched a lifestyle blog that featured her spending our family's money on designer clothes and exotic vacations. "Different daughters have different gifts," my mother would say diplomatically whenever the subject of Morgan's choices came up. "Morgan brings joy and light into people's lives." Despite the evident favoritism, I never complained. I believed that hard work and loyalty would eventually be recognized. When my father had his first heart attack 5 years ago, I stepped up even more. I postponed my own wedding to Derek, my college sweetheart, to manage the company during Dad's recovery. I moved back into my childhood home for 6 months to help my mother care for him. Meanwhile, Morgan posted about her healing retreat in Bali, explaining that she couldn't handle the negative energy of sickness. The heart attack changed my father. He became more reflective, often speaking about his legacy and the future of the company. During late nights reviewing contracts, he would squeeze my hand and say, "I'm so grateful you're here, Savannah. This company will be in good hands." Those moments sustained me through the difficult times, the missed vacations with Derek, the postponed plans for starting our own family, the endless working weekends. I believed I was investing in my future and honoring my family. My mother, always more enigmatic than my father, would sometimes watch me with an unreadable expression as I worked alongside Dad. "You're so much like him," she would say, and I took it as the highest compliment, never noticing the hint of warning in her tone. 3 months ago, my father suffered a massive stroke. This time, there would be no recovery. Morgan flew in from her latest adventure in Morocco, arriving just in time for the funeral. She wept dramatically at the service, dressed impeccably in designer black, while I stood stoically beside my mother, having handled all the arrangements and kept the company running smoothly despite my grief. "Your father would be so proud of you," whispered our family friend and company CFO, James Whitaker, as he hugged me at the reception. "He always said you were the backbone of this family." In the weeks following the funeral, I threw myself into work managing both my responsibilities and covering many of my father's duties. My mother, lost in her grief, retreated to the family's lake house, and I called her daily with updates. Morgan returned to her life of leisure, after a respectful 2-week mourning period, documented thoroughly on her social media. When the call came from Harrington and Williams, my father's law firm, I wasn't surprised. I had expected to be named in his will, likely to receive his controlling shares in the company. I had already started drafting a 5-year growth plan to present to the board. Derek and I finally set a new wedding date, feeling that now I could focus on building our own family while continuing my father's legacy. "It's what your father would have wanted," Derek said as he kissed me goodbye the morning of the will reading. "He knew how much you sacrificed. How utterly wrong we both were." Walking into the law office that fateful Thursday morning, I noticed Morgan was already there, looking uncharacteristically serious in a conservative black dress. My mother sat beside her, pale but composed. I took a seat across from them next to James, who had been invited as a close family friend and company executive. "Savannah," my mother nodded, her voice strained. Something in her eyes made me uneasy. Was it guilt? Apprehension? Theodore Harrington, my father's lawyer and golf buddy for 20 years, entered with a somber expression. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, adjusting his glasses. "As you know, we're here to read the last will and testament of Richard James Caldwell." I straightened in my chair, mentally reviewing the transition plan I had prepared for when I would take over leadership of Caldwell Properties. The company would need careful stewardship, and I was ready for the responsibility. To my beloved wife, Eleanor Theodore, read from the document. "I leave our primary residence and summer homes, as well as 40% of my shares in Caldwell Properties." That made sense. My mother had been my father's partner in everything. "To my daughter Morgan," he continued, and I noticed my sister sit up straighter, "I leave $10 million in cash and investments to use as she sees fit." Morgan gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. $10 million was a generous sum, certainly, but not surprising given my father's wealth. I waited for the next part, which would surely detail my inheritance of the remaining company shares and leadership position. Theodore cleared his throat and continued, "To my daughter Savannah." I held my breath. "I leave these words of wisdom. The greatest gift I can give you is the knowledge that you must make your own way in this world. You have the skills and determination to build your own fortune just as I did. This is not a punishment but a challenge to prove your worth." My blood ran cold. There had to be more. I waited, but Theodore folded the paper. "That's it," I managed to say, through numb lips. "That's all. The remaining 60% of Caldwell Properties shares," Theodore continued, avoiding my gaze, "will be transferred to Morgan Caldwell, effective immediately." The room began to spin around me. 15 years of sacrifice, of putting the company and family first, had culminated in nothing. The silence in the room was suffocating. I stared at Theodore Harrington, waiting for him to say it was all a mistake, a cruel joke, anything but reality. But the lawyer's uncomfortable expression confirmed what I couldn't accept. "This can't be right," I finally said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Dad always said I would take over the company. We had plans, strategies we discussed just weeks before his stroke." Theodore glanced at my mother, who was studying her hands with intense focus. "The will was updated 6 months ago, Savannah. Your father was of sound mind when he made these changes." 6 months ago. I mentally calculated that was right after the Johnson Tower project, the largest development Caldwell Properties had undertaken in years. I had spearheaded that deal, working countless nights to make it happen. My father had been ecstatic with the results. "Mom," I turned to my mother, searching for answers. "Did you know about this?" Eleanor Caldwell finally looked up, her face a mask of practiced sympathy. "Your father had his reasons, Savannah. He believed this was best." Best, the word came out as a strangled laugh. How is disinheriting the only person who actually worked in the family business? Best Morgan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, cleared her throat. Savvy, I had no idea this was happening. I'm as shocked as you are. But the slight curl at the corner of her mouth betrayed her. Somehow she had known or at least suspected what was coming. James Whittaker, who had been silently observing, finally spoke up. This is highly unusual, Eleanor. Richard always spoke of Savannah as his successor. Just last year he and I discussed the transition plan. My mother's eyes flashed with irritation. James, with all due respect, this is a family matter. A family matter that affects a company with over 300 employees, James countered. Morgan has never shown the slightest interest in the business. That's about to change, Morgan said, sitting up straighter. Dad believed in me. He knew I could bring fresh perspectives to Caldwell Properties. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Fresh perspectives. You don't know the first thing about commercial real estate. You can't tell the difference between a zoning variance and a building permit. Perhaps that's why Dad chose me, Morgan shot back, her voice hardening. He was tired of your by-the-book approach. The Johnson Tower project was successful, yes, but it was safe. Predictable. Dad wanted innovation. The mention of the Johnson Tower project again made something click in my mind. What exactly happened 6 months ago that made Dad change his will? My mother stood abruptly. I think we're done here. Theodore, thank you for your time. Morgan, we should discuss transition details for the company. I'm not going anywhere until I get some answers, I said, blocking the door. 15 years I've devoted to Caldwell Properties. Dad promised me a future there. Something doesn't add up. Theodore looked increasingly uncomfortable. Perhaps it would be best if you all discussed this as a family. My role was simply to execute Richard's wishes as documented, which were changed suddenly and dramatically 6 months ago, I pressed. Did he explain why, Theodore? Did he give any indication why he would cut out the daughter who actually worked alongside him? I cannot discuss private conversations with my client, the lawyer stammered. But his hesitation told me everything. There was something more to this story. Savannah, please, my mother said, her composure cracking slightly. Let's not make a scene. We can discuss this at home. Like you discussed, Dad's will changes with me. No, I want answers now. I turned to James, whose troubled expression mirrored my inner turmoil. Did you know anything about this? James shook his head slowly. No, but I intend to review the company bylaws very carefully. Richard set up certain protections for leadership transitions. This may not be as straightforward as it appears. Morgan rolled her eyes. Always the troublemaker, aren't you, Savannah? Can't you just accept that Dad made his choice? Maybe if you'd lived a little instead of becoming his clone, things would be different. Her words stung because they touched on a fear I'd always harbored, that, in trying to earn my father's approval, I'd sacrificed too much of myself. Derek had said as much during our rough patches, when I'd cancelled yet another vacation, or missed an important event with his family. But this wasn't about my life choices. This was about a sudden, inexplicable betrayal that made no logical sense. I'm going to the office, I announced, gathering my things. I want to review the Johnson Tower files. You no longer have authority to access confidential company documents, Morgan said, smugly. As majority shareholder, I'll be assuming control effective immediately. I stared at her in disbelief. You wouldn't even know where to find those files. You've never set foot in the executive offices. Things change, she replied with a shrug. Dad obviously saw something in me that you're missing. As I turned to leave, Theodore called out, Savannah, wait. Your father left this for you as well. He handed me a sealed envelope. He instructed me to give it to you privately after the will reading. I took the envelope, feeling the weight of the thick paper between my fingers. Without another word, I walked out, my mind racing with questions and suspicions. The drive to my apartment was a blur. Derek was waiting, his face eager for good news. When he saw my expression, his smile faded. What happened? He asked, guiding me to the couch. Through tears of anger and betrayal, I recounted the will reading. Derek's expression shifted from shock to outrage. "That makes no sense," he said, when I finished. "Your father practically groomed you to take over. Why would he suddenly change everything?" "I don't know," I whispered, remembering the envelope. I pulled it from my bag and stared at my name written in my father's distinctive handwriting. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The message was brief but devastating. "Savannah, by now you know my decision. I didn't make it lightly. Ask yourself this: how far would you go to protect our family's legacy? Not far enough, it seems. The Johnson Tower project showed me your limitations. Morgan may lack your experience, but she possesses something you don't: ruthlessness when necessary. In our business, that matters more than you ever understood." Dad, I read the letter 3 times, each reading increasing my confusion and hurt. What about the Johnson Tower project had disappointed him? It had been a tremendous success by every metric. "There's something we're missing," Derek said, reading over my shoulder. "This doesn't sound like your father at all." A cold realization began forming in my mind. "No, it doesn't," I agreed. "And I'm going to find out what really happened." The next morning I woke up with a clarity and purpose that cut through my grief and betrayal. My father's letter hadn't provided answers, it had only raised more questions. The Richard Caldwell I knew valued integrity and hard work above all else. The man who wrote that letter sounded like a stranger, praising ruthlessness and dismissing ethical business practices. "I'm coming with you," Derek insisted as I prepared to leave. After calling in sick to his teaching job at NYU, he added, "Whatever's going on, you shouldn't face it alone." My first stop wasn't Caldwell Properties. With Morgan's threat of restricted access, I needed to be strategic. Instead, we drove to James Whitaker's home in Greenwich. As my father's closest friend and the company's CFO for 20 years, James knew more about Caldwell Properties than anyone except my father. James welcomed us into his study, his expression grave. "I've been expecting you," he said, pouring 3 cups of coffee. "I couldn't sleep last night thinking about that will reading." "Did Dad ever mention changing his succession plans to you?" I asked, getting straight to the point. James shook his head emphatically. "Never. In fact, just 3 months before his stroke, we discussed transferring more operational responsibilities to you. He was considering semi-retirement." I showed him my father's letter. James read it with increasing disbelief. Ruthlessness. Richard valued ethical business practices above all. "And what's this about the Johnson Tower project?" "It was a triumph, came in under budget and ahead of schedule." "That's what I thought," I said, "but something about that project changed everything." James steepled his fingers, thinking. "The only unusual aspect of Johnson Tower was that last-minute zoning variance. Remember? We almost lost the project until you found that solution with the community garden space." I did remember. We had been required to allocate a percentage of the development to green space, cutting into the profitable retail area. I had negotiated a compromise, a rooftop community garden that satisfied the requirement while preserving our retail footprint. "It was a good solution," James continued. "The community got their green space, we kept our retail square footage, everyone won." "Except someone didn't see it that way," Derek interjected. "Could there have been another option your father preferred, something more ruthless?" The suggestion was troubling but worth exploring. The only other proposal came from Morgan's boyfriend at the time, I recalled. Jason Pierce. He worked briefly in our development division. James grimaced. "Pierce? Richard fired him shortly after Johnson Tower broke ground. I never knew exactly why. This was news to me." "Dad fired Morgan's boyfriend. She was dating him when I moved back home for Dad's recovery, but I thought they just broke up." "They did after he was fired," James confirmed. Pierce had suggested a different approach to the zoning issue. Something about finding leverage on a zoning board member. Richard shut it down immediately. A chill ran through me. Blackmail. That's completely against everything Dad stood for. Exactly, James said, his expression troubled. Which is why this will makes no sense. Richard would never value ruthlessness over integrity. Unless. Derek began, then hesitated. Unless. What I prompted. Unless someone was manipulating him. Your father had his heart attack, became more reflective about his legacy. Could someone have taken advantage of his vulnerability, changed his perspective somehow? The thought was disturbing but increasingly plausible. Morgan spent very little time with Dad after his heart attack, I pointed out, but she did come home for a week about 6 months ago. Right when the will was changed. James nodded slowly. Eleanor was more involved with Richard's recovery than anyone. If there was influence being exerted, I couldn't bear to complete the thought. My own mother. But the timing was suspicious. I need access to the Johnson Tower files, I decided. All of them, including any communications about Jason Pierce's proposal. I can help with that, James said, but we need to be careful. If Morgan realizes we're investigating, she could move to lock us out completely. Can she do that? Fire you? With 60% ownership, eventually, yes. But the company bylaws require board approval for executive terminations, and the board meets next week. We have some time. We spent the next 3 hours formulating a plan. James would gather the Johnson Tower files and any information about Jason Pierce's termination. I would review my own emails and notes from that period. Derek, with his background in research, would look into any connections between Pierce and my family that might not be obvious. Before leaving, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me. James, be honest. Is there any legitimate reason my father might have thought Morgan would be better for the company? James considered the question carefully. Savannah, I've watched you grow from a curious teenager to a capable businesswoman. You understand both the technical aspects of development and the human elements of negotiation. Morgan has neither experience nor demonstrated interest. There is no business rationale for Richard's decision. None whatsoever. His words strengthened my resolve. Something was deeply wrong with this situation, and I was determined to uncover the truth. That night, as Derek and I sorted through years of emails and project notes in our apartment, my phone rang. It was Morgan. Savannah, she said, her voice artificially sweet. Mother and I were hoping you'd join us for dinner tomorrow night to discuss your transition. Transition? Well, you'll need to clean out your office, of course. And I thought perhaps we could discuss a small consulting role for you. Something to help you land on your feet. The condescension in her voice made my blood boil, but I kept my tone neutral. How thoughtful of you. What time? 7 at the house. Oh, and Savvy, I know this is hard for you, but try to remember that this is what Dad wanted. Fighting it will only make things messier. After hanging up, I turned to Derek. They're getting nervous. They want to make sure I'm going to go away quietly. Are you going to the dinner? He asked. Absolutely. But first we need to find what they're hiding. The next day, James called with a breakthrough. I found something strange in the accounting for Johnson Tower, he said, his voice tense. A consulting fee paid to a company called Meridian Strategic Solutions. $5 million approved directly by Richard, without going through normal channels. What's strange about that? I asked. 2 things. First, we never used any consulting firm by that name on Johnson Tower. Second, I traced Meridian Strategic Solutions back to its registration. It was formed 2 days before receiving payment, and its listed owner is a shell company based in the Cayman Islands. My heart raced. Money laundering, possibly. But here's where it gets interesting. The shell company's paperwork was processed by the law firm of Pierce and Associates. Jason Pierce's family firm, his father's, yes. Jason is a partner there now. The pieces were starting to fit together. So Dad fired Jason for suggesting something unethical, but then potentially paid his family firm $5 million through a shell company. That makes no sense. Unless, James said grimly, Richard wasn't the one who authorized the payment. A cold realization settled over me. Someone forged his approval. The authorization has his electronic signature, but it was processed during his hospital stay after the heart attack, when you were running operations. But I never saw any $5 million payment. Exactly. It was deliberately kept off your desk. I only found it because I was specifically looking for irregularities. My mind was spinning with implications. James, we need to meet. Now. I know you're on the edge of your seat, wondering what happens next in this family betrayal saga. Before I continue, if you're enjoying this real-life drama that proves blood isn't always thicker than water, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more shocking family stories. Are you Team Savannah or Team Morgan right now? Let me know in the comments. Now, back to our unfolding investigation. James and I met at a small cafe far from Caldwell Properties headquarters, exchanging documents across a corner table while Derek kept watch for anyone who might recognize us. The evidence James had compiled painted a disturbing picture. The $5 million payment to Meridian was just the beginning. James explained, spreading financial documents before me. Once I knew what to look for, I found 3 more similar transactions over the past 5 years. All told, about $17 million has been siphoned from company accounts. I examined the paperwork, noting the timestamps and authorizations. These first 2 are from before Dad's heart attack. Are you saying he was involved in this? James shook his head firmly. Not knowingly, I'm certain. Look at the timing. All 4 transactions coincide with major projects where you led negotiations instead of Richard. The first was when he took Eleanor to Europe for your mother's 60th birthday. The second, when he was at that month-long economic forum in Singapore. When I was handling domestic operations, I murmured, seeing the pattern. And the third was during his heart attack recovery. Exactly. The fourth and largest, the one tied to Johnson Tower, was just after you negotiated the zoning compromise. When you were getting positive press coverage. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. Someone was using Dad's electronic signature to authorize fraudulent payments whenever I was in a position to notice normal financial operations. They were circumventing both of us. But who had that level of access? Derek asked. James and I exchanged glances. The answer was obvious and painful. Mom, I said quietly. She's had his power of attorney since the heart attack. She knows all his passwords, manages their personal finances, and has signing authority on company accounts for emergencies. And she's the only constant presence throughout all 4 transactions, James confirmed. But why would Eleanor do this? She and Richard built Caldwell Properties together. She has more than enough money. Maybe it's not about money, Derek suggested. What if it's about control? Or protecting someone else? The realization hit me like a physical blow. Morgan. Mom's always protected. Morgan made excuses for her behavior. What if Morgan and Jason Pierce were working together? He proposes the blackmail scheme for Johnson Tower. Dad rejects it and fires him, but then they find another way through Mom. And when your father changed the will 6 months ago, James began. It wasn't Dad at all, I finished. Mom used his electronic signature again, this time on legal documents. Theodore Harrington wouldn't question it if he received properly signed paperwork. We sat in stunned silence, absorbing the magnitude of the betrayal. My own mother and sister had conspired to steal from the company and disinherit me. But why? What could possibly justify such actions? We need more proof before confronting them, James cautioned. Electronic signatures and suspicious payments are compelling but not conclusive. What about the letter? Derek asked. The one supposedly from your father. Could we prove it's a forgery? Maybe, I said, pulling it from my bag. Dad had a distinctive handwriting style, but this is typed and only signed. We'd need exemplars of his signature to compare. I have something better, James said, a glint in his eye. Richard kept a journal, handwritten notes about major business decisions. He showed it to me once, said it helped him think through complex problems. If we could find it, It would be in his study, I said. But with the dinner tonight, I can't exactly search the house freely. Actually, Derek said slowly, the dinner invitation might be perfect. I'll create a distraction while you search the study. James can be nearby as backup. I squeezed Derek's hand gratefully. It's risky. So is letting them get away with fraud and theft, he replied firmly. I'm with you all the way. We spent the afternoon fine-tuning our plan. James would position himself as a concerned family friend, calling Eleanor shortly before dinner to say he was dropping by to discuss Morgan's transition into company leadership. This would give me a legitimate ally in the house. Derek would wait outside in the car, ready with an emergency phone call if I needed an excuse to access Dad's study. As evening approached, I dressed carefully in a conservative black dress armor for the battle ahead. Derek kissed me before dropping me off a block from my parents' house. Be careful, he warned. If they realize you know. They won't, I promised. I've learned from the best about keeping my cards close. Walking up the familiar driveway felt surreal. The house where I'd grown up now seemed like enemy territory. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key, a subtle signal that I no longer considered this my home. My mother answered, her perfect hostess, smile firmly in place. Savannah, darling, right on time. Mother, I replied, accepting her air kiss without returning it. Morgan was in the living room already sipping champagne. Savvy, I wasn't sure you'd come. Her voice was laced with false cheer. I managed a tight smile. And miss family dinner, I wouldn't dream of it. As my mother poured me a glass of champagne, I had no intention of drinking. The doorbell rang again. Now who could that be? Eleanor frowned, checking her watch. I invited James, Morgan said casually. I thought we should discuss the board meeting next week. You don't mind, do you, Mother? The flash of annoyance on my mother's face was quickly masked. Of course not. The more the merrier. James entered, nodding politely to everyone. I hope I'm not intruding on a family gathering. Not at all, I said, relief washing through me. Phase 1 of our plan was complete. James was inside. Dinner was excruciating. We made stilted small talk about the weather and neutral acquaintances, while avoiding any mention of the company or the will. My mother kept refilling wine glasses, though I noticed she barely touched her own. I was thinking Morgan announced as dessert was served that we should redecorate the executive office. Dad's style was so stuffy. We need something more modern, more Instagram-worthy. I bit my tongue, focusing on the goal. Let her talk. Every minute brought us closer to the moment when Derek would call. The Johnson Tower project got me thinking. Morgan continued, watching me carefully. We should be more innovative in our approach. More aggressive. Interesting choice of words, James commented mildly. Richard always emphasized ethical development practices. Times change, my mother interjected smoothly. Richard understood that sometimes business requires flexibility. I couldn't help myself. Is that what you call what happened with Johnson Tower, flexibility? A tense silence fell over the table. My mother's knuckles whitened around her fork. I'm not sure what you mean, she said carefully. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Derek's signal. Excuse me, I said, standing. I should take this. In the hallway, I pressed the phone to my ear. Perfect timing. You have about 15 minutes, Derek said. I'll call again if you need more time. I made a show of looking concerned for anyone who might be watching, then headed not toward the front door but up the stairs toward my father's study. My father's study remained exactly as he had left it. Leather-bound books lining the walls, his antique desk, positioned to catch the morning light, the faint scent of his cologne still lingering in the air. For a moment, grief overwhelmed me. Dad should be sitting in his chair, glasses perched on his nose, asking about my latest project. Instead, I was searching his private space for evidence against my own family. Focus, Savannah. I started with the most obvious places: desk drawers, filing cabinets, the small safe in the corner that I knew contained important family documents. Nothing resembling a business journal appeared. Time was ticking away. I needed to be more strategic. Dad had always been methodical, a man of routines and systems. Where would he keep a private journal? Not somewhere obvious, but somewhere meaningful to him. My eyes fell on the wall of family photos behind his desk. Among the professionally taken portraits and vacation snapshots was a simple frame containing a picture of my father as a young man, standing proudly in front of his first development project, a small strip mall in Queens that had long Caldwell Properties. The frame seemed thicker than necessary for a single photograph. Heart racing, I carefully removed it from the wall and turned it over. The back panel slid away, revealing a slim leather notebook tucked inside. Dad's hiding place sentimental and significant. I flipped through the journal quickly, recognizing my father's distinctive handwriting. The entries were dated and detailed, covering major business decisions and personal reflections. I turned to the entries from 6 months ago, around the time the will was supposedly changed. May 15, Johnson Tower zoning issue resolved, thanks to Savannah's ingenious community garden compromise. Proud of her approach, ethical and profitable. Board impressed. Thinking of announcing succession plan formally at year-end meeting. May 17. Disturbing conversation with Jason Pierce today. Suggested leveraging personal information against zoning board member Williams. Absolutely unacceptable. Terminated his position immediately. Morgan upset but will understand in time. Some lines cannot be crossed in business or life. May 20. Eleanor, concerned about Morgan's future, reminded her that we've provided trust funds for both girls. Savannah has earned her position through merit, not favoritism. Morgan needs to find her own path. May 23. Meeting with estate attorney next week. Time to formalize succession plan. Caldwell Properties to go to Savannah, 60% Eleanor, 40%. Personal assets to be divided equally between girls. Eleanor disagrees, but will come around. The next entry was dated 3 days later, May 26, feeling unwell. Pressure in chest since morning. Eleanor insisting on doctor. Writing this while waiting for appointment. Then nothing, just blank pages. The heart attack that had sent him to the hospital for weeks. But there was no mention of changing his will, no criticism of my handling of Johnson Tower, nothing resembling the sentiments in the letter I'd received. I took photos of the relevant pages with my phone, then carefully replaced the journal in its hiding place and rehung the frame. As I turned to leave, a voice from the doorway froze me in place. Find what you were looking for. My mother stood watching me, her expression unreadable. I hadn't heard her approach. Just needed a moment, I said, gesturing vaguely around the study. Being in Dad's space helps me feel connected to him. Interesting that connection requires going through his private things, she replied coldly. Like you went through his private things to forge his signature on company documents. The accusation slipped out before I could stop it. Something flickered in my mother's eyes, surprise, then calculation. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. Meridian Strategic Solutions. $5 million for non-existent consulting. And 3 other similar transactions, all processed when Dad was away or incapacitated. My mother's posture changed subtly, the perfect hostess facade dropping away to reveal something harder, more pragmatic. You've been busy. Did you think I wouldn't investigate? That I'd just accept being disinherited without question? I had hoped you'd be practical, she said. Take the hint and move on. Start your own company, prove yourself. That's what Richard would have wanted. Don't, I warned. Don't pretend this was Dad's idea. I found his journal, Mom. He was planning to announce me as his successor the week he had his heart attack. He never changed his will. For a long moment my mother said nothing. Then she sighed heavily, suddenly looking older than her 65 years. You were always too much like him, stubborn, principled to a fault. Those are compliments coming from me, I replied. Why, Mom? Why steal from the company? Why cut me out of my inheritance? What could possibly justify this? She walked past me to the window, gazing out at the manicured grounds. You wouldn't understand. You've never understood what it means to be a mother. Try me. Morgan is vulnerable. She doesn't have your strength, your capabilities. Without financial security, what would become of her? She'd be lost. She has a $10 million trust fund. How much more security does she need? My mother turned, her expression hardening. And how long do you think that would last with her spending habits? 2 years, 3, then what? She'd be penniless, helpless. So you decided to steal from the company we built and rewrite Dad's will. That's your solution. I did what was necessary to protect my daughter. I'm your daughter too, I said quietly. She waved dismissively. You don't need protection. You never have. From the moment you could walk, you were independent, determined. Morgan isn't like you. So you're punishing me for being capable, for working hard and earning my place. I'm ensuring both my daughters are provided for. You'll be fine, Savannah. You always land on your feet. The casual cruelty of her assessment stunned me. My own mother had decided I deserved nothing because I was strong enough to survive the theft. And Jason Pierce, how does he fit into this? Something shifted in my mother's expression, wariness perhaps. Jason is irrelevant. Ancient history. Is he because the shell company that received Caldwell funds was processed by his family's law firm? That's quite a coincidence. Before she could respond, Morgan appeared in the doorway. Mother, James is asking about the board meeting agenda. She stopped, taking in the tension between us. What's going on? Savannah has been doing some amateur detective work, my mother said, her voice suddenly light. Digging up old business matters that don't concern her anymore. Morgan's eyes narrowed. What did you find? Dad's journal, I answered directly. He never changed his will, Morgan. He was planning to announce me as his successor the week he had his heart attack. Morgan glanced at our mother, a silent communication passing between them. People change their minds all the time. Obviously, Dad realized I was the better choice. Or, I countered, Mom forged his signature on a new will after he was hospitalized, just like she forged his approval on millions of dollars in fraudulent payments to a company connected to your ex-boyfriend Jason Pierce. Morgan's face paled slightly before she rallied. That's ridiculous. You're just bitter because Dad saw through your goody two-shoes act. Am I then? Let's call Theodore Harrington right now. Let's have him verify when and how he received the updated will. Let's check the electronic signature timestamp against Dad's hospital admission records. Enough. My mother's sharp command cut through our argument. This discussion is over. Savannah, I think it's time for you to leave. Not without answers, I insisted. How long has this been going on? Does Jason Pierce still have his hooks in you, Morgan? Is he blackmailing you now? Morgan flinched visibly at the mention of blackmail. Interesting. You have no idea what you're talking about, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Then explain it to me. Help me understand why my own family would betray me this way. We should continue this discussion downstairs, my mother interjected, clearly concerned about James overhearing. Morgan, go tell James we'll be down shortly. No, Morgan said stubbornly. I want to hear what else she thinks she knows. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. James says, dinner's been too long. Everything okay? I know that the money trail leads to Jason Pierce's family, I said, watching Morgan carefully. I know Dad fired him for suggesting something unethical with Johnson Tower, and I know that somehow he's still involved. Morgan's composure cracked. You don't know anything. Jason was trying to help the company. Dad was too rigid, too old-fashioned. The zoning board guy was corrupt anyway, using his position to enrich himself. Jason just wanted to level the playing field by blackmailing him. That's a felony, Morgan. It's business. Dad just couldn't see that sometimes you have to play hardball. Morgan, be quiet, my mother warned. But Morgan was too agitated to stop. You think you're so perfect, don't you, Dad's golden child? But you have no idea what it takes to protect this family's interests. When Jason brought evidence that could sink our biggest competitor, Dad wouldn't use it. Called it unethical. Do you know how much money we lost because of his principles? And that justifies fraud and theft. It's not theft when it's your own company, Morgan shouted. It wasn't your company then, I reminded her. And technically, it's still not. The will was forged, which means it's invalid. My mother moved between us. That's quite enough. Morgan, go downstairs now. Savannah and I need to discuss this privately. Morgan hesitated, then stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Once Morgan was gone, my mother turned to me with cold determination. Whatever you think you know, you can't prove it. The will has been executed. The company shares transferred. It's done. Is it? I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos I'd taken of Dad's journal. This contradicts everything in the will and the letter you forged. Then, there's the money trail to Meridian Strategic Solutions, the timing of the transactions, and the connection to Jason Pierce. Do you really want this all coming out in court? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across my mother's face. You would drag our family name through the mud, create a public scandal. Your father would be horrified. Dad valued truth and integrity above all else, I countered. He'd be horrified by what you and Morgan have done. She sank into Dad's chair suddenly, looking exhausted. You don't understand the pressures, the complications. Morgan needs structure, purpose. The company gives her that. At my expense. And what about the hundreds of employees who depend on competent leadership? What about Dad's legacy? Your sister is not incompetent, my mother snapped. She's just different from you. More creative, less constrained by rules and conventions. She knows nothing about real estate development, I said bluntly. And based on what she just revealed, she thinks business ethics are optional. Is that really who should be running Caldwell Properties? My mother stared at the photo of Dad on his desk, silent for a long moment. What do you want, Savannah? Money, a position in the company. I want what's rightfully mine. What Dad intended me to have. And I want the truth about Jason Pierce's involvement to come out. Jason is complicated, she admitted reluctantly. After Richard fired him, he became vindictive. He had information about some of our early property acquisitions, questionable tactics Richard employed before you were born. Nothing illegal but potentially embarrassing. He blackmailed you, I realized. That's where the money went. He prefers to call it consulting fees, my mother said bitterly. Morgan still believes he loves her, that they're partners in some grand business strategy. She doesn't understand he's using her. And you enabled this instead of going to the authorities and risk the scandal, risk the damage to Caldwell Properties, to your father's reputation. I shook my head in disbelief. So your solution was to steal company funds, forge Dad's will, and hand control to Morgan, who's being manipulated by Jason. How does that protect anything? It bought time, she said defensively. Jason promised the payments would end once he and Morgan took control. He said with access to company resources, he could ensure any compromising information would be permanently buried. And you believed him, Mom. He'll never stop. Once Morgan depletes her inheritance, he'll start draining the company directly. He's using both of you. My mother's shoulders slumped. For the first time I saw past her polished exterior to the frightened woman beneath. She'd made terrible choices, but perhaps not entirely for selfish reasons. What happens now? She asked quietly. That depends on you, I replied. But first, I need to know everything. When did this start? How much does Morgan know about the forged will? Over the next 20 minutes, my mother revealed the full extent of the conspiracy. Jason had approached her shortly after being fired, threatening to expose questionable land deals from the company's early days. Initially, she'd paid him from her personal funds, but as his demands increased, she began using company money, forging Dad's signature on the authorizations. Morgan had discovered the scheme accidentally, but instead of being horrified, had seen it as an opportunity to prove her business acumen by helping manage the situation. After Dad's heart attack, Jason had suggested transferring company control to Morgan as a way to ensure continued payments without scrutiny. "And the letter to me?" I asked. "Why add that cruel message?" My mother had the grace to look ashamed. Jason said you'd be more likely to accept the situation if you believed your father had rejected you professionally. That questioning your capabilities would make you doubt yourself. The calculated psychological manipulation infuriated me, but I maintained my composure. Does Morgan know the will was forged? She suspects, but doesn't want to know for certain. Plausible deniability, Jason calls it. A knock at the door interrupted us. James poked his head in. "Everything all right up here?" Morgan seems quite agitated. "We're just finishing," I said. Mother has been explaining some interesting financial arrangements involving Jason Pierce. James's eyebrows shot up. "Pierce again? I thought we'd seen the last of him." "Apparently not," I replied. "He's been blackmailing the family and using Morgan to gain control of the company." My mother started to protest, then deflated visibly. "It's true," she admitted. "I made terrible mistakes trying to protect everyone." James entered, fully closing the door behind him. "Eleanor, what have you done?" While my mother repeated her confession to James, I texted Derek. "Got everything. Evidence of forgery and fraud. Mom confessing. Come to the front door now." When Derek arrived minutes later, we moved the conversation downstairs to the living room, where Morgan was pacing anxiously. "What's he doing here?" she demanded, pointing at Derek. "Supporting me," I said simply. "As my future husband should." "Morgan," my mother said wearily, "it's over. I've told them everything about Jason, the blackmail, the forged will. We can't continue this charade." Morgan's face contorted with fury. "You had no right. This was our chance to finally get the recognition we deserve. Dad never appreciated either of us. He was always, Savannah this, Savannah that. For once I had the power." "This isn't about power," James interjected. "It's about Richard's legacy and the future of hundreds of employees who depend on Caldwell Properties." "And it's about family," I added quietly. "The real legacy. Dad wanted to leave." Morgan collapsed onto the sofa, tears streaming down her face. "What happens now? Are you going to have us arrested? Humiliate us publicly?" I exchanged glances with Derek and James, then addressed both my mother and sister. "That depends on what you do next. I want 3 things. First, a legally binding admission that the will was forged, restoring my rightful inheritance. Second, Jason Pierce permanently removed from our lives, with evidence of his blackmail scheme turned over to the authorities. And third, full financial restitution to the company for every dollar that was misappropriated." "And if we agree," my mother asked cautiously, "then we handle this privately as a family. No public scandal, no criminal charges against either of you." But I added firmly, Morgan will have no role in company leadership. Her inheritance will be placed in a properly managed trust that provides income without allowing for reckless spending. "That's not fair," Morgan protested. "It's more than fair," Derek countered. "It's merciful, considering the alternative is prison for fraud, forgery, and embezzlement." My mother placed a restraining hand on Morgan's arm. "He's right. We should be grateful Savannah is offering us a way out." She turned to me. "I accept your terms. All of them." Morgan struggled visibly with her pride, but finally nodded in sullen agreement. "Fine. But I want my trust administered by someone other than her," she said, pointing at me. "James can oversee it," I suggested, "with quarterly reviews by an independent financial advisor." With the framework of an agreement established, James excused himself to call our family attorney, not Theodore Harrington, who had either been complicit or negligent in accepting the forged Will, but a respected corporate lawyer who had worked with Dad occasionally on complex deals. As the night wore on, documents were drafted, statements recorded, and tears shed, both of anger and eventually remorse. By dawn, we had a binding agreement that would restore my inheritance while protecting the family from public scandal. I never wanted it to come to this, my mother said, as we concluded the painful negotiations. I thought I was protecting everyone. By betraying Dad's wishes, by stealing my birthright, I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. By keeping the family whole, she insisted. I was wrong about how to do it, but that was my intention. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I understood her flawed reasoning better now. We'll need time to rebuild trust, I said. A lot of time. 1 week later, Jason Pierce was arrested on blackmail charges based on evidence provided by my mother. The fraudulent will was invalidated, with a judge privately approving the restoration of Dad's original estate plan. The company funds were repaid from my mother's personal accounts, and I assumed my rightful position as CEO of Caldwell Properties. Morgan surprisingly seemed relieved to be freed from Jason's influence. At her request, I helped her enroll in a business program at NYU, her first genuine attempt at professional development. Our relationship remained strained, but a fragile bridge was being built. As for my mother, she retreated to the lake house, ostensibly to grieve privately for Dad, but more likely to escape the daily reminder of her betrayal. We spoke weekly, carefully rebuilding a relationship that would never again be based on blind trust. 1 year after the fateful will reading, I stand in my father's, now my office at Caldwell Properties. The company has thrived under my leadership, with the Johnson Tower project winning awards for innovative urban development. Derek and I finally married, with Morgan serving as a bridesmaid in a gesture of reconciliation. My mother attends board meetings but no longer has operational authority. Sometimes the greatest inheritances aren't measured in dollars, but in the wisdom gained through adversity. Dad taught me to value integrity and hard work. The painful betrayal taught me to trust my instincts and fight for what's right. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey of family betrayal and ultimate justice, I can't thank you enough. This experience taught me that sometimes the people closest to us can hurt us the most, but also that redemption is possible when truth prevails. Has anyone in your family ever betrayed your trust, and how did you handle it? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story of family drama and sweet, sweet karma. Until next time, remember that while you can't choose your family, you can choose how you respond to their actions. Thanks for watching.